So this is the end of 1773 begins with Governor Hutchinson thinking he can explain to the dullards in the assembly what their role is, and once he, like any good college professor, had done that, they would simply acknowledge it. It ends with Massachusetts in chaos and the government suspended, and Hutchinson finally, at the end of May of 1774, gets on a ship and goes to England, one of the last ship to leave before the port is closed. And the harbor is now filled with warships as more British soldiers are brought to keep peace in Boston, and General Gage arrived. And very quickly we see emerging in Massachusetts two different governments. The government of General Gage, Governor Gage, and in fact he had his secretary, Thomas Flucker, is it Flucker or Fluker? Fluker, Thomas Fluker, trying to get into the assembly chamber to read the proclamation that Governor Gage has suspended the assembly, but they figured out how to lock the door, as I think I explained. He's locked out. He nails this to the door. Inside, the members of the assembly are choosing delegates to a Continental Congress to meet in Philadelphia, hoping to bring the other colonies into an alliance with Boston, with Massachusetts. And you have then the assembly is suspended. The members of the assembly trek out to Watertown and meet as a provincial congress. Gage, meanwhile, wants to assemble his government. Again, it was a long-standing wish of these governors to move the assembly out of Boston, where it was thought it would be subject to the whims of the Boston mob, and Gage wants to move it to Salem or somewhere else. He has trouble impaneling a new government, which will not have an elected assembly. So this is the state of things in 1774, as we have two different governments emerging in Massachusetts. One has a charter and commission from the British Crown, as the earlier one had. The other has the sanction of the people in the towns of Massachusetts. And in September of 1774, the Congress met in Philadelphia, and John Adams described it as the happiest day of his life. Paul Revere arrived with the Suffolk resolves of Suffolk County, calling on the other colonies to join with Massachusetts in resisting these changes in the administration of the empire brought about by the ministry, and to resist. And instead of telling Massachusetts, you've really gone too far this time, we don't want to have the same thing happen to us, that is the closing down of our ports and the suspension of our governments that happened to you, as instead the Congress sides with Massachusetts. This, Adams said, was the happiest day of his life, and he left Philadelphia with high hopes that now the Congress had sent a petition to the British Crown, calling on the Crown to have the ministry ease up on its crackdown on Boston and on Massachusetts. The other colonies were going to stand with Boston, and Adams left Philadelphia expecting never to return to that big city, the largest city he had ever set foot in. The message goes off, and Congress does say we'll meet again in the spring. And when Congress did meet again in May of 1775, it was after the colonies had seemed to receive the British Crown's reaction to their olive branch petition, and that was the bloodshed at Lexington and Concord. General Gage was empowered to disarm the colonists, which he did quite effectively, or almost quite effectively. Powder House in Somerville, what's now Somerville, Powder in Salem, trying to get the arms at Portsmouth. Unfortunately for Gage, there was a warning afoot, and then going out to Lexington and Concord to gather the munitions there. And this seemed to be the response of the British Crown, the beginning of a war, what we'll call the War for Independence, which Alicia reminded us is the most significant event in modern history, the Revolution and this War for Independence which ensued. So the next meeting of Congress happened after war had begun.